Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with my Arya Stark predictions. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down what happens to Arya Stark in every single episode of Game of Thrones Season 7, so let's get right into it. And the first scene with Arya Stark doesn't start with her. It actually starts with Lord Walder Frey. We see him seated at his table, overlooking all of his bannermen, and the remaining sons that Arya did not kill. And we're going to notice something different with Walder Frey. He's not talking. And we're going to be very confused because he was killed in the last season. But we're going to see Walder Frey raise his glass to everyone at his feasting table and take a drink, and everyone ends up drinking with Walder Frey. And then to our surprise, everyone in that room will start choking and dropping dead. And it's at this point where Walder Frey is going to remove his face, and we're going to see Arya Stark watching everyone choke on their wine. In another scene, we're going to see her enter the dungeons of the twins. And she's going to go straight to her uncle Edmure, and he's going to be curled up on the cell floor, and Arya is just going to apologize that she is so sorry that he was taken away from his family. So she lets him go and asks him if he knows where they are. He claims he doesn't exactly know, but he knows that they are not at the twins, because Walder Frey wanted to keep them separated. So Arya is going to let him go, and she's going to tell him that he must reclaim his seat in the Riverlands. And she tells him that she's going to take him somewhere safe, and then from there on out, he's got to find his family. And that takes us to episode 2, and Arya is going to take Lord Edmure to an inn that we are all very familiar with. They're going to go in and sit down and have some food, and they're going to be greeted by Hot Pie. And of course, we're going to have a scene with Hot Pie and Arya really catching up on lost time. And because of Hot Pie, they're going to get free food and a free bed for the night. But Arya is going to refuse the free offer and just tell Hot Pie that she needs to take care of Edmure. He's the next Lord of the Riverlands, he needs to find his family, and he needs to be taken care of for a couple of days. So Hot Pie agrees. After Arya eats her food and her conversation with Hot Pie and Edmure ends, she will say goodbye and start to make her journey north to Winterfell.
I see a darkness in you. And in that darkness, eyes staring back at me. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. Eyes you'll shut forever. We will meet again.
And we see Arya again on the King's Road. She's heading north, and she stumbles across an interaction between the Brotherhood Without Banners and Melisandre. I don't think in this season she's going to cross paths and interact with Melisandre or the Hound or the Brotherhood. I think she's simply going to eavesdrop on their conversation. I'm aware of Melisandre and Arya's interaction. I know that one day, Melisandre will see brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes staring back at her, and their eyes at Arya will shut forever. But I believe that this prophecy isn't for this season. It's for Season 8. In Season 8, I believe we will see a true interaction between Melisandre and Arya. And I believe after this interaction, Arya will shut her eyes forever. But in this season, an interaction doesn't make sense. With Melisandre coming south to Dragonstone and the Hound heading north to the Wall, I believe Arya is just going to simply come across them and use them for information. And this is going to be a crazy scene for Arya because she knows Beric Dondarrion, she knows Thoros of Myr, she knows Melisandre. They were all on her list at one point. And then she sees the Hound. And the Hound is a character that Arya genuinely loves. She took him off of her list, so I think she's going to have a sigh of relief and be very emotional, and she can't really take herself to interacting with that group. She's just going to sit from a distance and watch.
You think you're on your own?
And this scene isn't just going to share Arya's perspective. We're going to be getting the Brotherhood having a conversation, and then we're going to be seeing Arya standing aside listening. And they're going to be communicating about purpose. What is the purpose of their existence in this world? What must they accomplish? And the Brotherhood tells Melisandre that they believe they need to head north because there is a threat and the long night is coming. And Melisandre tells them that she thought she knew what to do. She thought Stannis was the one, the true savior, but she was wrong. And the Brotherhood naturally asks about Gendry, the bastard boy who she took. And she said, unfortunately, he didn't shift the tide. Stannis still died anyway, and he was rescued and shipped off to King's Landing away from her reach. But she does tell them about the moment where the Lord of Light did answer, and it answered in reviving and resurrecting Jon Snow, Ned Stark's bastard son. And she exclaims that she believes that this individual, Jon Snow, is a really important figure in the long night to come. And of course the Hound brushes it aside, saying that Red Priests believe everyone is special. But then she says that there are very specific people who have a role to play, such as Daenerys. I'm going to Dragonstone to treat with her because she also has a role to play in the long night. And then Arya heard what she has to hear and she leaves, and she learns so much about this interaction. She learned that Gendry is actually alive and in King's Landing, which is a huge relief for her. She learned that Jon was then killed but revived and is now king of Winterfell. And she also learned that the Hound is alive. And all of this information will drive Arya to move faster to Winterfell. She wants to see her brother, the King in the North, and the rest of her family that reside there. And then in episode 3, Arya will reunite with another character. She'll be riding along the King's Road headed north, and she will come across a dead stag sitting in the center of the road. Naturally, Arya will get off her horse and check out the scene. But then on her right side in the bushes, she hears some rustling. So she slowly turns her head to see this giant direwolf. And Arya immediately knows that it's Nymeria, and Nymeria seems to be just staring at her. And in this interaction, we'll see Arya progressively come closer and closer to Nymeria, trying to have that connection with her. And eventually we'll see them connect. Arya will be petting Nymeria and they'll be having this wonderful moment. But then during this moment, she will hear a ton of wolves howl. And Nymeria's attention gets distracted and she ends up running away. And Arya is going to be really emotional seeing her direwolf again, finally, after who knows how many years. But what this hints at is something really important, is that Nymeria is surrounded by wolves, and this will play a huge factor in Season 8. This little scene is just an introduction to Nymeria, and the wolf howls that Arya hears really hints at Nymeria being in charge of her own wolf colony. And this colony is going to be huge, and we will see that unravel further in Game of Thrones Season 8. And I believe throughout this whole show, as Arya is traveling to Winterfell, we will see Nymeria kind of possibly following her slowly as she goes up. And we will see Nymeria again in Season 8. But then after that scene, Arya finally makes it to the Neck in Greywater Watch. And it is here where she goes in and she talks to Howland Reed. And she asks for a place to rest her head for the night as she makes her travels north to Winterfell. And Howland Reed is really taken aback that this is Ned Stark's daughter, so they end up sharing a scene together and really communicating. The whole purpose of this scene is to introduce Howland Reed into the Game of Thrones universe. And we're going to see Howland Reed talk about Ned Stark and how he was such a great man. And he says that it's unbelievable how much things have changed, but things are finally looking up because Jon is now King of the North. And Howland mentions that he never expected this to happen at all. And he also mentions that he knew Jon when he was a baby. And Arya did not know that fact, and she finds it very interesting. And Arya mentions Needle and how Jon gave her this sword, and she's had this sword for her whole journey across to Essos and back to Westeros. And then just before Arya goes to bed, Howland Reed asks Arya to please write him if she hears anything about his children, Jojen and Meera Reed, as they've been gone for such a long time and he's been awaiting their return for years. And Arya says she definitely will, and she'll be leaving in the morning. In the next episode, we'll finally see Arya arrive at Winterfell, and she's greeted by Bran and Sansa. And we naturally get a huge scene of all three of them sitting in a room catching up on what has been going on. Arya communicates about how she survived, what she did. And it'll be an interesting connection between Arya and Sansa because they survived through thick and thin, but in such different ways. They both have drastically different experiences, and it shaped them into different people. And Arya naturally gets the rundown on Sansa's history, how she was taken by the Boltons, and the whole uprising that resulted in the Battle of the Bastards, and how Jon is now seated as King in the North. And Arya is extremely disappointed to hear that Jon is not even at Winterfell. She can't even see him because he left for Dragonstone. So right away, Sansa writes a letter to Jon informing him that Bran and Arya are currently at Winterfell. And Bran tells Arya to write to Howland Reed and tell him that Meera is on her way home. And Bran also tells her that they may need Howland Reed in the coming months. So in episode 5 is where the bulk of the drama comes from. Sansa's going to be fighting back and forth with Littlefinger all the way building up to episode 5. And it's here where Arya finally gets involved. Littlefinger is going to go to Arya and approach her and play his manipulations, telling her that it must be so nice that she's home and that he apologizes that Arya had to live a life of survival, that she lived alone with no one to protect her. And he says that maybe her mother and Robb could have found her and rescued her if Sansa never lied. And by lying, he means writing a letter saying that her and Arya are both in King's Landing and sending that letter to Robb Stark. And this had huge ramifications because it made Catelyn trade Jaime Lannister to rescue her 2 daughters. It pretty much lost Robb the war. But I don't think this manipulation worked the way Littlefinger wanted because Arya immediately dismisses him, and that ends the scene. And it makes sense for Arya to be so dismissive because she was there the moment Littlefinger was meeting with Tywin Lannister. She was there when Littlefinger said that he wanted to represent the Lannisters' best interests. So naturally she goes straight to Sansa. And Arya mentions be careful around Littlefinger. and she tells Sansa the story about how she was a cupbearer to Tywin Lannister, and how she learned many things about their plans with Littlefinger. And she also told her that Littlefinger tried to manipulate her and telling her that Sansa wrote a letter to Robb, telling her that she was in King's Landing. Sansa apologizes and tells her not to worry and stresses that they are family and they must band together no matter what. And Sansa says that she knows that they fought in the past, and Sansa will always take care of Arya. So Sansa tells her immediately to go talk to Bran, because there's a lot that she needs to know. So that takes us to the next scene where Arya goes to see Bran at the Weirwood, and she asks him what it's like to revisit their family and the past, and Bran tells her that sometimes he never wants to leave, but he expresses that it helps discover who people really are. So Arya tells him that Sansa wanted her to talk to him, and Bran tells Arya everything that Littlefinger has done, and he stresses that Littlefinger has done much more than she knows. And because Bran has a connection to history, he knows so much information about Littlefinger. He tells her that Littlefinger betrayed their father. He started the war for the Five Kings. He is so unpredictable and he only serves his agenda, so therefore he must be eliminated. Bran stresses that when the Long Night comes, they're going to be fighting the looming threat, and Littlefinger's going to be scheming behind the scenes, looking for any opportunity to further his agenda, and it could hurt us in the future. And Bran tells her this whole time him and Sansa have been looking for a way to bring him down, and Sansa has been scheming Littlefinger at every turn. Bran tells her that Sansa's been holding him back while Bran is trying to find some evidence to prove Littlefinger's acts, to prove that Petyr Baelish is guilty. And Bran does tell her that there isn't much. Littlefinger always covers up his tracks really well. But he does tell her that there is something, and he has been awaiting her return because he needs her help. And he tells her of a dagger that is owned by Littlefinger that was used to try and assassinate him as a child. He tells her that this dagger was also a part of Littlefinger's lie, which caused their mother Catelyn to capture Tyrion Lannister. He describes what the dagger looks like to her with a red ruby and a golden handle, with a curve to it. And Bran tells her to look for this dagger and find it and return it to Sansa, and he's confident that Littlefinger brought it with him. Bran is confident enough that this dagger could build a case against Littlefinger and eliminate him. And then that takes us to the last episode where Arya is scavenging through Winterfell to find the dagger. And she ends up going into Littlefinger's chamber and she finds it, and she ends up returning it to Sansa. And Sansa is very surprised to see that the dagger is exactly how Bran described, and she naturally gets really emotional. So it is with this when Sansa sentences Littlefinger to death, and Arya carries it out with his own dagger. And Sansa then tells Arya that she deserves to have the dagger, she needs it more than anyone. And she tells Arya, what are you going to name it? All blades have a name. And Arya tells Sansa that she's going to name it Lady. And this name comes full circle. Her first sword needle was based around Sansa and their very immature relationship. Sansa had her needles, and Arya finally had one of her own. And this dagger that Arya has represents Sansa when she is more mature, and they can have an older relationship. And it pays tribute to Sansa in many ways. For one, her direwolf was named Lady. But the most important thing is it describes Sansa's whole journey in Game of Thrones. Littlefinger had control over this dagger. He used it in all of his schemes. He used this dagger to start the war against the Starks and the Lannisters and to push his hidden agenda to power. He loved this dagger, but with all of his manipulating and abuse, the dagger finally turned against him. And now this dagger is a lady. And this dagger that Littlefinger had on him at all times is perfectly representative of Sansa. She was always with Littlefinger. Littlefinger used her in all of his schemes. He sold her to the Boltons to push his agenda. And finally, after all that abuse, she finally turned against him and stabbed him in the back. And this dagger is really going to push the relationship that Arya and Sansa has. It was rocky and they didn't get along, but this name is really going to secure the love that the two characters have for each other and the respect that they have for each other. And that is what happens to Arya Stark in Game of Thrones Season 7. If you like this video, please like it and share and subscribe. I got a lot more predictions coming down the pipeline, but until then, I'll see you guys later.